It's the Growing for Market podcast.
That can feel like a very long process. I mean, especially with the biennials, we'll seed onions in April of year one, and then, we're harvesting in September of year two, and then usually I'm getting paid in February of year three for that crop. So it's a long journey, but I love it. It's so fun to see plants through the whole life cycle. And, I find the biology of it really interesting to just watch the plants flower and make seed and go through that process of threshing and cleaning it and getting it as clean as possible and striving for those high germination numbers.
Yeah, that's a long time to wait. Hello, and welcome to the Growing for Market podcast, where we talk about growing, marketing, and the business of growing flowers and vegetables for local markets. I'm Andrew Mefford, your host and the editor of Growing for Market magazine, proudly celebrating 35 years in 2026 as the magazine by and for vegetable and flower market farmers. If you're enjoying the podcast, just wait till you see the magazine. Go to growingformarket.com for more. Also, if you could give us a follow and a rating, it really helps other like-minded people find the podcast. And now, let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. Most CSAs don't lose members on price. They lose them because their systems break. In a recent 70-minute panel, 3 veteran CSA operators serving hundreds to thousands of members break down production planning, fulfillment, retention, and what they'd change for 2026. They talk honestly about what fails when you scale, how they protect member trust, and what actually drives renewals. Download the full conversation at farmhand.partners/GFM and see how the fastest growing farms are building smarter businesses. That's farmhand.partners/GFM. So you got your soil tested, or you need your soil tested. It's time to contact Ohio Earth Food. Since 1972, they have been growers' trusted source for organic soil amendments to apply before you plant to prevent those deficiency symptoms that limit production. Their knowledgeable staff have all been a part of certified organic operations and can help you choose the best products for your soil and deliver or ship them right to your farm. With locations in Northwest Ohio and just north of Madison, Wisconsin, Ohio Earth Food wants to be your partner for organic inputs. Don't count on luck this year. Start your seeds in the Seed Catapult potting soil and put their Revita fertilizers in your beds, and rest assured that your plants will have all the nutrients, stimulants, and energy for whatever comes their way. Feed your soil and let your soil feed the plants. Visit them at ohioearthfood.com. This episode is brought to you by Tend, the all-in-one AI-powered farm management platform trusted by modern growers. Whether you're growing vegetables, flowers, or fruit, or managing a nursery, greenhouse, or vineyard, you know how much time gets lost in planning, tracking, and staying organized. Tend helps you cut through the busy work so you can focus on growing and selling what matters. With Tend, you can plan your crops, assign and track tasks, manage inventory, and handle your sales and accounting all in one smart, easy-to-use platform. Whether you run a 1-acre farm or manage a large operation, Tend adapts to your scale and style, supporting everything from manual labor to fully mechanized workflows. Try it for free at tend.com. No credit card required. That's TEND.com. Streamline your season and grow with confidence. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Sebastian Aguilar to the Growing for Market podcast. Sebastian and his family run Summertime Seed Company in McMinnville, Oregon, about an hour southwest of Portland. They grow vegetable and flower seeds sold under their own brand and for wholesale that is sold under other companies' brands too. So there's a definite chance you've planted a Summertime Seed Company seed, whether you bought it from them or not. So without further ado, welcome to the Growing for Market podcast, Sebastian.
Hey, Andrew. Great to be here.
Hey. It's great to have you. In fact, I almost feel like Katie Kula should be doing this interview because I think you are a pretty close neighbor of hers. I can't remember if she technically lives in McMinnville, but you're very close to where her farm is. But she's on hiatus right now, just with work and farm and life, all the things. So
Next time.
yeah, we could do part 2 sometime. Hopefully Katie will come back because I did love her interviews. But I'm also happy. It would be a whole different interview, I'm sure. You might have more of a local connection to talk with her, but on the other hand, I might ask more beginner mind kind of questions because I know less about your area. Although, I have done farms in California and Washington State and visited a lot of farms in Oregon. So it's not like a foreign land to me, but you guys definitely know a bit more about Oregon than I do. All right, so I had the pleasure of meeting you at the ASCFG conference back in January, which is such a great conference. I'm still vibing from the big flower energy. And there you told me you had been growing produce and flowers before starting the seed company. So can you tell us a bit about the history of your farm and why you made the switch to seeds?
Yeah. So let's see. I started farming in 1997. I was an apprentice on a farm. I was living in New Mexico, and that's the state where I grew up. And it was an organic vegetable farm. My wife also interned on that farm. That's where we met. And yeah, we were young enough and crazy enough and naive enough to quote unquote start our own farm the next year. And so we just jumped right in and rented 5 acres after that and made every mistake you could possibly think of. But, kept going. So yeah, for a long time we focused on fresh veg, fresh flowers, started off with farmers market, added CSA, ended up doing wholesale to grocers and restaurants, and did that all the way through until I think maybe 2015. And so in 2008, we were at that point farming in Washington State up in the Port Townsend area. And so that's where Organic Seed Alliance is based.
Oh, yeah.
And so we were lucky to just, be their neighbors. And John Navazio and Michaela Colley both kind of just helped guide us into the seed world. We were doing variety trials with them. We started growing some seed. And so they kind of got our foot in the door. And once we started doing it, we were like, hey, we like this. Let's keep doing it. And so, yeah, it was kind of on the side for a few years. And I think by 2013, 2014, we were like, yeah, let's, make this our focus. And after a few years, we had transitioned. And so I can't remember exactly, maybe 2016 was our first year where we were just doing seed crops and no longer fresh veg or cut flowers.
Okay. So about a decade now, just focusing on seeds.
Yeah. I mean, I think our first seed sale was 2010. But yeah, since we've solely focused, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's cool that you had that Port Townsend connection. I wonder if you would have got into seed growing if you hadn't had that, because people may know, yeah, like you said, the Organic Seed Alliance is up there. And John Navazio, such an amazing resource. I was lucky enough to know him a little bit. Sadly, passed away a couple years ago, but people may know him for... Do you remember the name of the book that he wrote about organic seed breeding?
Yeah, it's called The Organic Seed Grower.
Did you just look on your
on my
your
bookshelf,
library
yeah.
shelf? Yeah.
Exactly.
Nice. You probably know this. That's a great book if people are interested in seeds. And John was such a great guy. It's a real loss to not have him around anymore. But that's so cool that you have, I can see how you got into that, because Organic Seed Alliance, really great organization. I was lucky enough to go to one of their conferences. It's been a while, probably a decade or more ago now. But Organic Seed Alliance is a great organization if people are interested in organic seeds. They got a lot of resources there. So
yeah, a lot of training. They do a lot of research and a lot of advocacy too. So definitely a good group.
All right. Can you tell us about your farm in terms of acreage, like open versus covered, hardiness zone, climate, all those agricultural details?
Yeah. So this is our 9th farm. which is
Oh,
crazy.
wow.
I was counting right before we started talking. So we've been here, let's see, our first season on this property was 2022. So, like I said, we started farming in New Mexico. We did a short stint in Wisconsin. We moved to Washington State in, I think, 2006. And then we moved to Southern Oregon in 2013 was our first season there. So all that to say is we're loving Northern Oregon. Great place to farm. We've got 16 acres that we lease. And of that, we've got, I don't know, maybe 12 acres of like beds, that we'll cultivate. And we've got a little more than an acre and a half of tunnel space that we use. And most of that is 3-season tunnels. So not your typical heavy duty greenhouse you leave up all year round. We'll leave the frame up, but they're like the gutter connect, so they can't take a snow load. And so we roll the plastics up to the peak by the end of November, and then we'll roll them down again in March. So we just call them 3-season tunnels. But yeah, they've been great.
Yeah, those are cool and a great way to cover a lot of space if you don't need the full 4 seasons. Because I was looking on your website, I sometimes call those like Haygrove tunnels, but I also know that that's a brand name, and I know it's blanking, but when we were out on the West Coast, there was another company that made most of the tunnels out there. But if people who have not visited your website yet, they're the gutter connect, like you said, and they don't have sides, or do they have sides? Like mostly I've seen people have them where they don't have end walls. And do yours have sides? Or are they open on the sides?
No, we've left them open. I bought the parts to put sides on them, but I haven't done that and haven't really felt the need. I mean, it would be nice. I think it would definitely make a big difference on either end of the season. So I think for the month of April or May, first half of May, and then take them off, or maybe end of May, leave them open. Yeah, so it's not exactly like growing in a greenhouse, but just having that protection on the up above. It definitely does get warmer in there. I find the shade from the plastic, even though it's not dramatic, a lot of crops really like that. And yeah, we'll do, so we have 18 of those, and so 6 of them, we have a 3-year rotation, and so blocks of 6, and 6 of them we'll do peppers and tomatoes in, 6 of them we will cover crop, and then 6 of them we'll do a mix of flowers usually, and crops that, are kind of on the edge for our climate. So things like basil or things that just mature right at the end of the season, seed production wise for us. Mm-hmm.
Right.
And then we are also experimenting with netting some of the tunnels, so putting insect nets all around the side, and then introducing pollinators. We've been using blue bottle flies, and then this year I think we're going to try leafcutter bees, and then, basically creating an isolated pollination tent, so we can grow some extra crops in there.
So, but you haven't done that yet. But if you're using the flies already, does that mean you have pollination tents or cages somewhere on the farm, just not these the 3-season tunnels yet?
Oh, no, we've done it 2 years in a row, and this will be our 3rd year. But, we're just kind of still perfecting that system and trying to understand, how many flies or bees do we need, and, what's just dialing in all the, the details.
Okay, all right, yeah, because people may be familiar with the use of the flies, because I did an interview with Erin Benzacane a year or 2 ago, and she was talking about getting all the flies in to do pollinations in her. She had netted up some high tunnels to be able to have the flies do pollination. And
exactly, yeah.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard about the use of did you say leafcutter bees?
Yeah, the flies were okay. They kind of get expensive depending on how many you buy, because you got to order them a lot, and with quick shipping because they're alive. And then, they're decent pollinators, but they're not the best. So I was doing some research, and yeah, alfalfa growers in Eastern Oregon buy a lot of leafcutter bees to help with their pollination. It's it's one of those, well, especially for alfalfa seed, it's kind of like one of those crops like almonds. You just gotta, there's so many flowers. You got to bring in extra pollinators, I guess, when you've got it on a large scale. And so, yeah, talking to some breeders of the bees, it seems like it's going to work out. They've done some work in tunnels with a lot of success. So I'm excited to try it.
Cool.
And for those, you're just buying a board with a lot of, well, I haven't done it yet. So hopefully I'm getting this right. Like little cocoons inside straw kind of things, and then they're going to hatch. And I think they live most of the season. So it's just a one-time spring purchase, and as long as you've got the food and the water for them, they should work the whole season. So yeah, we'll see. I'll give you a report how well it works.
Okay. You can tell Katie when she does your second interview.
Nice.
And now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. Whether it's tomatoes to market, flowers in the spring, or vegetables for your family, growing in a greenhouse protected from the weather provides the right environment for a harvest you can count on. Rimmel greenhouses are strong, durable, and easy to assemble, offering the quality that you need to grow productively year-round. Rimmel greenhouses are proudly built right here in America and shipped to anywhere in the U.S. With technical sales staff members located across the country, many with growing experience, the Rimmel Greenhouse's team of experts will serve as your trusted partner every step of the way to ensure that you get exceptional value from your greenhouse investment. Visit Rimmel.com to get a quote today.
Hey, it's Lindsay from Grown By. There are a lot of farm sales platforms out there, but there's only one that's cooperatively owned by farmers. And that's Grown By, your all-in-one solution to simplify farm sales. I'm proud and excited to share 2 new features now available on top of the tools you already know and love. Number 1, our customizable CSA box builder. It allows your customers to simply say what they'd like in their share, and Grown By matches their preferences with your weekly harvest. Number 2, our new wholesale-only marketplace. Developed with the Culinary Institute of America, it makes your life easier with a dedicated shop for your wholesale customers. No more texting those chefs, combining retail and wholesale inventories and records, and, drumroll, automatic payments on due dates. No more chasing down late payments. These new features sit alongside our popular online sales and traditional subscription CSA tools, making it easier than ever to manage your farm's business. As you start to get ready for next season, we'd love to hear from you and see if our cooperative can be a partner in growing your farm. Visit us at grownby.com. That's GROWNBY.com.
And now, back to the show. Okay, and so the flies you're caging off the high tunnels. Is that to keep them from getting crossed with something of a similar species growing outside the tunnel?
Exactly. So, yeah, so normally, so obviously in seed production, you want isolation from other varieties, so you're keeping your variety pure. And so, right, and just as a quick background, you've got your self-pollinating plants, and then you've got your outcrossing plants, and the outcrossers are either pollinated by insects or by wind. And then of course, there's this whole spectrum where you have plants that are mostly self-pollinating but can be insect pollinated. And so every species sort of has its own needs in terms of how much isolation it gets. But so for all the outcrossers that are pollinated by insects, those are the ones that a barrier like insect netting can work to prevent cross-pollination. So, normally we would only be able to grow one of those a year, so, for example, zucchini, normally we would just plant one zucchini on the farm for that year because that's what we're growing for seed. But now with these tunnels, we theoretically could plant a second one in there and have it isolated.
Cool. Did your operation change a lot when you went from produce and flowers to seeds?
Yeah. I mean, basically the first half of the season is the same. We're just growing a lot of veg, a lot of flowers, getting them in the ground, taking them to maturity. And then that's where the difference starts. We leave them in the ground much longer because now all of a sudden we're waiting for them to produce seed. So obviously with a plant like lettuce, it becomes a full season crop instead of a succession crop. And so, it's really the harvest that's very different. And then there's no more wash pack and marketing through the summer per se, or fresh marketing. So that's all replaced with seed cleaning in the fall through the winter. So yeah, so it starts off the same. A lot of it, a lot of the in the field stuff prior to harvest is about the same. And then it shifts dramatically after that.
Okay. And you're happy when your lettuce bolts now, unlike
exactly.
fresh market growers. Okay. I've always thought one thing about growing for seed is that it must be nice to not have to worry that all the produce itself has to look perfect. But I'm sure there are other pitfalls in seed growing. Is that the case? I think for example, your crop is in the ground for longer. So it could be, even though it doesn't have to look perfect, it's got to survive. And of course it's got to be healthy. And, if it's dying at the end, I'm sure it's not going to make as many seeds. So am I right about that? Did you trade certain pests and pitfalls for other ones when you became seed growers? Or is it a lot like growing fresh produce and just you're happy when it bolts instead of being upset when it does?
I mean, obviously there's all the same challenges, in that first half of whatever pest and disease, you would be dealing with anyways. And then, yeah, I mean, because you have to grow those crops for longer, I mean, sometimes there's more time for issues to arise. And, and you don't really know what your finished product is going to be like until the very end of the process. So, you grow the plant, you harvest it, you thresh it, you gather the seeds, you clean the seeds. And then at that point is when you send it in for germination testing and maybe disease testing. And until you get those tests back and say, yes, you got high germ and yes, the seed is nice and clean, then you were successful. So sometimes that can feel like a very long process. I mean, especially with the biennials, we'll seed onions in April of year one, and then, we're harvesting in September of year two, and then usually I'm getting paid in February of year three for that crop. So it's a long journey, but I love it. It's so fun to see plants through the whole life cycle. And, I find the biology of it really interesting to just watch the plants flower and make seed and go through that process of threshing and cleaning it and getting it as clean as possible and striving for those high germination numbers.
Yeah, that's a long time to wait.
Yeah, I mean, cash flow is tough. I mean, basically we get paid in January or February of the following year for most of our crops, and there's no income really in between. I mean, now that's changing because we launched the retail seed company. So, that will change things. But primarily we've been wholesale growers for the last decade.
Okay. So I was looking at your website. You grow a lot of different crops, and I'm guessing maybe not every single one every year, but it was kind of hard for me to tell, are there crops that you specialize in, or you just grow anything that people are wanting to buy?
I mean, luckily we are in a climate where we can grow a lot of things successfully. So, we have grown over 180 species on the farm. And so we originally focused mostly on vegetable seed. And so especially for our wholesale customers, that's what we grew the most of. That's what there was the most orders for. And so when we decided that, we wanted to launch the retail site, well, we always had an interest in flower seed, but since we weren't growing too many species for our existing customers, that's where we could really explore and grow things on spec or, without having it be pre-sold. And so, we really expanded our species list when we decided to do that. And that's been a lot of fun. I love growing flowers, and it's beautiful. The insects love it. Brings a lot of good energy to the farm.
Yeah, it's probably great for beneficials and pollinators and everything. I'm glad you brought up the flowers because, yeah, some of the pictures on your website are just glorious of like these big long beds in full flower, which you can tell they're for a seed crop, right? Because most working flower farmers, they're cutting the flowers before they're in full bloom, right? Because they usually want them to bloom out in a cooler or something like that. So it's just it's a great marketing picture to have that, to have this like bed that's just in peak bloom. Yeah, it must be beautiful on the farm when the flowers are blooming.
Yeah, I'm hooked. I'd probably focus on flowers. I mean, I love vegetables. I'm always gonna love vegetables and grow vegetables, but I am having a lot of fun growing all these flowers.
Yeah. Is there any sense in trying to ask you to like what crops you grow? Because like you said, you've grown there's a very diverse lineup on your website, but do you want to take a stab at that, or you would just leave it at like,
sure,
like
yeah,
we've done
no.
180? Okay.
Happy to. I mean, yeah, so at this point, 80 to 90% of our business is still contract growing for other companies. And so, usually when we grow for them, they're large orders. And so by acreage, we're mostly growing tomatoes and peppers, cucurbits, lettuce. We do beets, kale. So if we took those crops, that's almost 2/3 of our acreage, because we're doing those, we grew 1,000 pounds of kale and 300 pounds of winter squash seed, and so our little new retail company doesn't move those kinds of volumes by any means. We just need little plots for those. And so basically we'll grow like a half acre of this and 2/3 of an acre of that for our main customers. And then we'll have lots of little plots of other things that we're growing on spec for the seed company for summertime, retail website. And when I say a small plot, I mean, we usually don't do anything less than 50 bed feet. We try to keep 100 plants minimum for genetic diversity and health. So.
And how wide are your beds?
They're 5 foot on center, and then they're 300 feet long. So we'll break them up into sections when we're not doing a full bed. Before we launched a retail company, I was like, I'm never doing a partial bed of anything again. I just want to do full beds. And then now I'm back to partial beds and navigating that, but it's good.
Yeah. Well, it seems like I'll never do is like famous last words. It's like I don't know how many times I've said I'll never do something and then end up doing it again. So
yeah.
Hey, actually, I just thought of a question that I hadn't thought of before, and that's I know a lot of times when you're doing seed productions that there will be like what people call stock seed, or like which is usually, you tell me, but like higher, like a very high quality seed, right? Because of course, if you're doing a seed production, you want to start with really good seed that's been selected well and all that kind of stuff. So when you're doing a production for another company, do they provide you with stock seed, or how does that work?
Yeah, I would say over 90% of the time, they're sending us the seed that they want us to plant, and that seed is either coming out of some kind of breeding program. So they did big selections, or we'll do new varieties for some companies, and we also have companies who will ask us to do some stock seed selections, so we'll go out and pick the best plants, save that seed, and that's what we'll use for the following year. And then, yeah, other reasons we might use a specific seed is that, like, especially with our tomatoes, peppers, and cucurbits, we do disease testing on the stock seed prior to planting, and so, which costs a lot of money. So sometimes, we'll dip back into a lot that was tested and we know is disease-free rather than choosing some other lot. But yeah, I mean, it's all, in the seed world, it's all about the genetics. And so you're trying to start with the best genetics you can, and as well as disease-free. So, which sometimes means we're not planting the freshest seed and we have to, make this seed work. But yeah, for the most part, it works out good.
Okay. So I don't know if this question makes sense, but how do you decide which crops to produce? Like you talked about your rotation, are you like rotating in a conventional, like how a lot of vegetable or flower farmers would, of trying to break up like blocks that by family and like plant so much of a certain family? Or I'll let you answer it. How do you like in any given year, how do you decide which crops you're going to produce or not?
So we do have a kind of crop rotation that we try to follow, but that doesn't necessarily guide my crop choices. Well, so since most of our business is growing for other companies, we spend January and February talking with them. What do they need? Negotiating contracts that outline what we're growing, how much of it, etc. And so that plan kind of comes together, and then and that's relatively straightforward. A lot of our customers, we grow the same species year after year for. And then now with the summertime side of things, we're looking at what we see other growers wanting to plant. We talk to other growers. Where's their interest? What's their needs? It's been interesting to try to figure out what to grow in terms of understanding the market. And does it make more sense to provide the organic option of the tried and true workhorses for people? Is it, do people want us to carry really rare and unique varieties? And, should we be trying to find those? And I mean, probably the answer is a little bit of all those things. But yeah, so it's fun and a challenge to look around and try to find things that I think our customers would really find this to be interesting and desirable and want to try it out. And, this is all pretty new to us. We launched less than a year ago. So, obviously the proof will be in, what sells and what doesn't sell and where's the interest. And, we'll follow that to an extent. So.
Okay. Oh, okay. So Summertime Seed, you've been operating under that brand for only about a year. Did I get that right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's right.
Okay. Oh, okay. Because that makes a lot of sense, because when you first contacted me, I did like what probably anybody does these days. I went and looked at your website, and because I'd never heard of you before, I didn't know if you were, brand new company but when I looked at your website, it was, your greenhouses look beautiful. It was like clear you were doing had been doing this for a while, as you've told us. And so I was like, wow, like you guys clearly know what you're doing. So, okay. So that's the development that you've been operating. You've been doing it for a lot longer, but just for a year or so as Summertime Seeds. Okay, cool.
Yep. Yeah. So for most of the past, since 2010, I think we had called our farm Chickadee Farm. And so that's how people knew us. And it was surprising and shocking at how many people thought we were chicken growers with the name Chickadee. And so, when we were getting ready to launch this retail side of the seed business, we were like, well, I don't think Chickadee is going to work. So, we had to come up with a new name, which, was pretty funny, but it's worked out well. And so we made that transition, and Summertime's got a good feeling. So I like it.
Yeah, who doesn't love summertime? Although I do love the chickadee name also, because chickadee is the state bird of here in Maine where I live. Partially, I don't know how they came up with that, but the chickadees do stick around all year long. Like now we're like buried in snow, and we still see the chickadees and hear their song. So I love the chickadee name. But that's really funny that people thought you were chicken growers. But yeah, I like Summertime Seeds. That's a good name for a seed company. I think you did well.
Thank you.
Do you do any hybrids, or all open pollinated?
We do all open pollinated. We've dabbled at doing some hybrid productions for some customers, but yeah, it's a lot of work, and I feel better. I like the OPs better anyways. They've got a future to them. So when you do hybrid production, you always got to just go back to the parent lines, and it's funner to see a variety evolve over time and select it and watch it improve. So, yeah.
Okay. I kind of figured that was the case, but You never know. That's why I wanted to ask. Because, yeah, I know. I mean, a lot of hybrid varieties involve a lot of hand labor, which is why a lot of that is done in China or like Italy or overseas. But I also know that there are ways to do, depending on the crop, there are some ways to do hybrids that don't necessarily need all that hand labor. So I just didn't know. So,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it looks like you produce, well, and I know you mentioned a number of biennial varieties like kale and collards and other brassicas, and you mentioned the onions. So people, I'm guessing as an audience of farmers, probably a lot of them know biennials produce the seed in the second year. So I'm guessing based on where you are that you can overwinter those in the field. So is that indeed the case? And can you tell us a bit about the seed production? Like maybe you already mentioned the onions, like maybe the process on some brassicas or some other biennial that might be interesting for folks to hear about.
Yeah, I mean, so for kale, usually we'll seed that in end of July, early August. The goal for a lot of those crops is to kind of get them to that teenage stage, where they're maybe not fully mature, but they're past the seedling stage. So, they're young, they're strong, they're going to make it through winter. Yeah, and then, yes, our climate is mild enough where we can just overwinter most of that stuff in the ground. There's things like beets that we'll dig them up just because rodents would, just eat them all winter long. So it's almost easier to just protect them out of the ground and then replant them in March. But yeah, for most of the brassicas, we'll just leave them in the ground and, which is fine. I mean, the challenge with overwintering crops usually is weed control. You just want to go into the winter having managed the weeds really well, just because here the fields get wet and they're, basically you can't really do any work in the field. So you want to go in with a clean field. Otherwise, you'll just watch the weeds all winter kind of, slowly do their thing. And I mean, they slow down just like any other plant, but, they'll take off early in the spring and can get out of hand pretty quick. So, yeah. And then you just have to watch for disease. I mean, a couple years ago, we had a big storm, ice storm and windstorm, and, it kind of really roughed up the crop. And then, with all these open wounds from broken leaves and things, botrytis started setting in. And so, you just kind of have to watch those kinds of things and make sure you're keeping the plants healthy. So, but yeah, I mean, most of those crops are pretty tough and they'll start flowering in March, April. Usually by the end of June, we've harvested them. The planting timing is different for everything. So, we'll plant some things in October, we'll plant some things in June or July. Just depends how big you want that plant to be going into winter.
Okay. And I also know a lot of times smaller or younger plants are more resilient to cold temperatures and things like that. So does that play into your considerations as well, or?
Yeah, some plants you don't want them too big or they'll get more damage. Yeah. So what's a good example? Like snapdragons. And snapdragons is one of those crops where we can spring plant it if we wanted to, but we also can fall plant it. And usually if we do fall plant it, we'll get a slightly earlier bloom and maybe slightly higher yields. So there's advantages for doing that. But that one, is one of those ones where it has to be pretty small. Otherwise, it can easily get frostburn and die back. So, or what's another one? Like foxglove, digitalis. We like to plant those early enough so they have a big enough frame and root system so that when they really take off in the spring, we're going to get a substantial yield. So, yeah, it just depends. But you're right, in general, a younger plant is going to be hardier than an older plant.
Yeah. Is it a balancing act? Because I also figure a bigger plant is probably going to make more seeds. So,
yeah.
Right, is it trying to balance keeping the plant small enough that it'll make it through the winter while having it as big as possible so you get the biggest seed yield or something like that? I'm just speculating, but it's just what you were saying made me curious.
Yeah, no, that does play a factor into it. So, and then different species kind of grow differently in the spring, so some will put on lots of growth before they flower, and some kind of are like, we've done our thing and we're just going to go straight to flowering, or maybe not straight to flowering, but there's less spring growth than otherwise. But yeah. And going back to weed control, it's nice to be able to plant early enough where we can get, a good 3 to 4 cultivations in before winter sets and kind of exhaust that weed seed bank in the top inch and go in with a nice clean field.
Yeah, that makes sense. I assume you're not producing every variety every year, but maybe I'm wrong about that. But either way, how do you store your seed to keep it viable as long as possible? Like, do you have freezers or refrigeration enough, or like, you tell me, what do you guys do?
So the general rule of thumb is you want to keep humidity and temperature measured in Fahrenheit. You add them together and they should be under 100. And so what do we do? Well, so after we clean the seed, we'll put it in a room with a dehumidifier to make sure that it's nice and dry and pull out any extra moisture. Luckily, we have a pretty dry climate up until about mid-September. And so anything that's, harvested and threshed before that doesn't need much drying, but we'll go ahead and put it in a room with a dehumidifier for a few weeks anyways. And once we know the seed is dry enough, then we put it into, they're called barrier pouches. They're those foil bags, with a nice Ziploc on them. And so those are airtight and light proof. And so that's what, you're trying to, if they're airtight, they last longer than if they're not. So we put them in those, and then we have a temperature controlled room that we keep at 55, and we keep the humidity at 30 to 35. So we have a room where we keep our small lots that we're, working with a lot in terms of fulfilling orders. And then we've got a refrigerated shipping container that also has a AC unit and a dehumidifier and that at the same settings. And so that's where we'll keep our bulk seed.
Cool. Have you ever tried breeding your own varieties?
We have not tried creating a new variety, but we have done some breeding work or selection work, I guess. It's kind of the same process, with older varieties. So, when we were fresh market growers, Elster Craig was one of our favorite onions to grow for farmers market. And we grew it for a long time. And, we were buying seed for it on an annual basis. And we were kind of watching the genetics of it kind of go downhill, having more variability in it. And all of a sudden there was these pink ones showing up. And so, whoever was growing that seed wasn't doing the best job, in terms of roguing and selection or isolation. Yeah, so we took that on as a project, and with John's help, we used to grow a lot of bulbs. So this was still back when we started this back when we were doing market gardens. We'd pick like the 100 best bulbs out of our production for market, fresh market. So that was great, taking the top 1% or less, and then we'd plant those and save the seed on those individually, each plant, so you end up with 100 different bags of seed, all of the same variety, but they're all, single plant selections. And then you go through and plant each of those. They're called a family, right? Because all those seeds have the same mom, but you don't know who the dad is necessarily because they're insect pollinated. So you plant those all in a row, and those are all the siblings. They all have the same mom, different dads. And you're looking for families that are overall really nice. And when you see a family that's really nice, you know that the mom was a really good mom. And you can pull out a few of the weaker plants, because maybe their dad wasn't quite as vigorous or whatever quality you're looking for. And then, so that's an easy way without, genetic tools to kind of try to peek into the genetics of what you're working with, is by planting these individual plant harvests and seeing them as families. And then, once you pick your favorite families, you can recombine them. And so that's the process that John taught us to improve crops with. And so, we've done that with that onion. And otherwise, I mean, that's a lot of work. So most of the crops will just go through and do what, it's called just a mass selection, which is where you're picking the best plants and saving seed from them for use as stock seed. But in that situation, you're still getting drift from other plants little by little. It's a slower process, So by planting out in family lines, you can make quick progress. Doing mass selection, it's a little slower, but you're still moving the bell curve of quality plants forward.
Yeah. Okay. And actually, you just talking about the selection work that you did on Ailsa Craig does remind me that even really old or heirloom open pollinated varieties still takes a lot of work to maintain them. And so I imagine you guys, do you want to say anything about that as far as, do you have any more to say on rogaine? Because I guess I want to impress upon our audience how much work it goes into even, people might think like a variety like Ailsa Craig is like done, right? But everything that's alive is mutating or getting, you could get, like you said, genetics from some plants that aren't as good. Like you have to, to keep an open pollinated variety good, it takes work.
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
I want to give you the opportunity, if you want to talk about it, like what that work involves, just to keep, open pollinated varieties strong and from going downhill over time. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly like you said. I mean, every generation of plants is alive and is making slight changes to itself. And so, by quote unquote doing nothing, it doesn't mean nothing is happening. Changes are still being made no matter what. And so it's important, at a minimum to go out and rogue every year, right? So, I mean, I'm sure every grower has seen this. You plant X number of plants of the same variety, and you're going to notice slight differences between those individuals. And so, so that's an important job on the farm, is ideally before flowering or before there's any cross-pollination, if we're talking about a cross-pollinating crop, you go out and you do some evaluations and look at the stand and make sure it's what you want it to look like, and you're pulling out any individuals that are weaker or off types or whatever, the genetics you wouldn't want moving forward in that population. And so you have to know that population, because some varieties have more variability in them than others. Some people want a certain amount of variability. And so, that's the whole subjective side of plant breeding and plant maintenance is, it's kind of like, okay, well, whatever the steward likes is what ends up moving forward, right? It's like, oh, I like this shape, or I like that color, or I like this flavor, whatever criteria you're putting those plants under. And so things are always shifting. And so it's hard on us, especially when we are trying something new and there's like a lot of variability, to know, okay, well, where's the line? Are we going to rogue 30% of this out? And sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't. And it's a call to make, like, okay, well, obviously this variety has a lot of natural variability in it. But then you're trying to read the past, like, is this what the breeder or the community that bred this wanted? Or is this like, did somebody mess this up a few generations back? Or, you're just trying to see through it and then use your own judgment. Well, what is a good future for this variety? What do we want it? What are its strengths and how do we build on those? And what are its weaknesses and how do we slowly get those out? So yeah, it's fun. I love that part of it, to walk the fields and do that assessment.
Yeah. Okay. So you're looking at your seed productions and just, I assume, roguing out or like pulling out or killing plants that are like off the wrong color, the wrong plant size, and all that kind of stuff. Like basically you have an idea in your head of how the variety should look, and you're taking anything out that doesn't conform to that. Is that like a good description of
exactly.
roguing in plant breeding? Okay.
Yep. The knife on my hip is whipped out and you just put an end to it.
All right. That's what I thought, but I wanted to make sure. And also for audience, because I know there's a lot that goes into keeping open pollinated varieties, strong and good over time.
Yeah, I mean, and if it's a variety that you want and that there's interest in and it's highly variable, then that's when just roguing out the bad ones might not be enough. And that's one of those situations where you're like, okay, well, maybe I'll do some single plant selections and plant the family rows and try to kind of accelerate the process of guiding this variety into what your expectations or the general expectations would be. We grew a red iceberg for a customer where only 30% of the heads were like really firm and nice, and then there was a lot of like kind of loose heads, which, they were not the best. And so we went the extra effort and flagged all the best plants, saved that seed separately. We'll try to see if we can bring that variety back up to where it should be. For whatever reason, it was not maintained as well as it could be and needs a little extra help. So, but luckily most things that we're growing, you just pull out 3%, maybe 5% of the plants that are just slightly off, and it's real nice. And so it just, once you get them to a stage where you can maintain, that's pretty easy.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds like that's quite a project if only 30% of the plants conform to expectations. Did you know it was going to be like that? Like, did you know, did they tell you, this is going to be a bit of a project? Were you ready for that? Or were you like, oh, this variety is a bit of a mess?
Yeah. No, I was not pre-warned.
I was just going to say, that results in a lot more work. Like removing 70% of a crop versus 3%, that's a whole different ball game. And then, of course, that would reduce your seed yields by a lot, right? If you're obviously, it's the right thing to do to sort of rejuvenate the variety, or I don't know what you call it, but it's a lot more work and with a lot less seed at the end if you're having to rogue super hard like that, roguing out 70% of the plants.
Yeah.
To get it back to conformity or whatever you call it. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in most of our contracts with our customers, there's language in there about roguing, and if more than 3 to 5% needs to be rogue, we work out a negotiation for how to price that, and usually they'll make a payment for us growing all those plants to that point, so it's not like just a total loss on our side of things. Most seed companies understand the process pretty well and are willing to want to work with us to make sure that everyone's winning in this.
Okay, that's kind of what I was wondering about, was if there's a mechanism for you to get paid differently if there's a lot of extra roguing that needs to happen. So
sure.
That makes sense, but I'm glad to know that's in there, so you get paid for that important work. And now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. Seven Springs Farm Supply has been the market gardener's supply company for over 30 years. Their catalog includes a complete selection of organic fertilizers, pest and disease controls, growing mixes, and cover crop seed. Their experienced team is ready to help you problem solve and find the right solution for your farm and your goals. Seven Springs is committed to providing growers with superior products and service because they understand that their success depends on your success. Request a free paper catalog and learn more at sevenspringsfarmsupply.com. Seven Springs cooperative purchase deliveries are coming up. Visit their site to check dates and locations. This episode is sponsored by Nifty Hoops. Nifty Hoops designs and builds high tunnel systems for growers who want dependable results. What stands out is that Nifty Hoops tunnels are complete systems designed by experienced builders with the details worked out ahead of time. That means the core components are included from the start, like end walls, ventilation, doors, baseboards, and double-layer poly, rather than being added later. The tunnels are designed for real wind and snow loads, efficient assembly, and long service life. You can choose a self-build kit with guidance from written manuals and videos, or a community build where Nifty Hoops works alongside you and the project gets completed in one day. Nifty Hoops has built more than 1,500 hoop houses across the country, including many funded through the NRCS High Tunnel Initiative. They're known nationwide for predictable outcomes and ongoing support. If you're planning a high tunnel project and want it done right, you can learn more at niftyhoops.com. And now, back to the show. You told me that you made a custom planning, logging, inventory SOP system using something called Coda. I'll say I don't even know what Coda is, but I'm very interested in farm systems. So can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, I was always into spreadsheets and trying to plan and track all the data from the farm in those, and had a lot of success, but there was always these limitations that I felt were frustrating. And then I came across the Snake River Seed Cooperative, and they had published or shared an example of their Coda program that they had made, and I was like, oh wow, yeah, that's what I'm looking for. And so that was great to get a heads up from them on the possibilities of this. Yeah, so Coda it's a lot like, there's another program out there called Notion, which is kind of the same thing. And these are no-code database software that is also more than just a database. You can use it like a word processor or a website builder. I mean, basically you just start off with these blank pages, and then you can kind of add whatever you want onto them. And they're also, and one of the nice features that you can add are databases. And organizing your information with a database rather than on spreadsheets is just so much better, because all of a sudden you can link one table to another really easily. And so, like, as an example, our main database is what we call our seed lots. So every production that we do, let's say it's red Russian kale, right? So there's all the information you want to capture. What was the seeding date? What was the stock seed used? What was the harvest date? What was the yield? Et cetera, et cetera. But then I also have like another database that's all about just kale. It's the species database. And so there I can kind of keep all the information of like, when do I normally plant kale, and whatever facts that, or data that you want to have about kale that's irrespective of which lot you're growing or which year you're producing it. And then you can tie those things really easily together in a database and link one to the other. And, and you can do this with spreadsheets too, but the ease and the visual cleanliness of it in a program like Coda is just really nice and makes it much user friendly. So it's kind of like making an app for the farm. And I think that there's good ones out there. When I first started making spreadsheets, like, there weren't all the programs that you can buy for market gardening now. Like, I just listened to your last podcast and you guys were talking about the heirloom program. And, so it's basically, what I've done is like recreate that same style of thing. But, because we're seed growers, we also had different needs. And so I made it so that it can track inventory and we can record all our germ testing in there. But then I made it even broader where we can put in SOPs, and it's kind of like an all-inclusive thing to the farm. And it's still evolving all the time. I'm trying to get feedback from the crew on what's helpful or not, but it's simple enough where it doesn't take a whole lot to learn how to create these things and make something custom for your farm. So yeah, I found it really, really helpful and nice.
Okay, well, cool. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's not something that I had heard of before. And I don't think I even heard of the other one that you mentioned, but I know those kinds of things are coming a long way. So that might be a, good suggestion for somebody in the audience. And I can imagine you guys have a lot of data to keep up with. I mean, imagine you're tracking most of the same things that a vegetable or flower grower are tracking, plus some other stuff on the seed side of things. So I can see how it would be helpful to have something to wrangle all that data.
Yeah. Yeah, it gets a little overwhelming at times, but yeah, with a good tool, it becomes manageable. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm always interested in what tools people are using. Actually, speaking of what tools you're using, if we could switch over to maybe talk about some more physical tools. I know you said you use permanent tractor beds. And I wanted to ask you if you could tell us a little about those and how you maintain those, because I know a lot of people use permanent beds, but I hear of it more often in the sort of like hand tool scale kind of thing. So I just wanted to ask you, can you tell us a bit about your tractor permanent beds, like just how you maintain them and flip them? And
Yeah, so, our first 5 years of farming, the new organic grower was kind of our go-to book. Yeah, right. This was the late 90s. And so we were broad forking and using a rototiller, and we had permanent beds then. And I liked what I was seeing. Soil health has always been a key focus for us. And so years later, when I started using tractors, I wanted to basically mimic what I had been doing on the hand scale, but with the tractor. And so permanent beds was a key part of that. Because really, there's not that much difference between pulling a shank through the soil with a tractor and broad forking by hand. It's the same action, more or less. And the bigger difference is just that, you're taking a 3 to 8,000 pound machine over your field, and, you're compacting whatever's under the tires. And so, so it just seemed logical to me to kind of concentrate and focus that weight and that impact in one place year after year. And so, yeah, so how does it work? Basically we set up a permanent marking point in our field, or several of them. And then whenever it's time to go do field work, or at least bed preparation, we'll take the tape measure, we'll start at that point, and then we'll flag the center of the beds. Like I said, ours are on 5-foot center. Flag it at both the head and foot of the bed. And then, we just drive as best we can straight and, from flag to flag. So, yeah, we use a variety of tools in bed preparation, from deep shanks for subsoiling to, we've got a Perfecta field cultivator that we use quite a bit for shallow tillage. We do use a rototiller when needed, but, and we have a small disc that we use, but all the same principles that I was using by hand, I'm still using, where you're trying not to invert layers, any aggressive tillage that we do, we're trying to keep it as shallow as possible, and it's just for seed bed preparation or planting into. And then we also use a bed shaper, which kind of brings some of that soil from the path up and levels the bed, and that makes using a transplanter and cultivation equipment work a lot better, to have a nice even surface for all those other tools to work on. We bury our drip tape, which I really like. And so, yeah, so it's been great. So our beds, never get driven on. And you can see the difference year after year. The challenges are, it does take more time to set up all the flagging, and to try to be precise with your driving, right? I'm not the only farm to be doing this. A lot of larger scale farmers have incorporated it as well, but they're all using GPS. So the tractor's on autopilot, and that makes it a lot easier. But the biggest challenge we face is knowing how to manage our paths, because they still need to be tilled up and worked at certain points in time. Because if I don't work them, all of a sudden you have these really loose beds, and then you have these really compacted paths. And sometimes what can happen is the tractor will want to slip off even if it's in a furrow, it'll want to slip off the compacted path into the softer soil on either side. And so, you just have to, on a regular basis, kind of till that pathway with some kind of like chisel shank, and make sure you're keeping a furrow there just so that tractor tracking can stay straight.
Do you run shanks in the tire paths to that's what you're doing to keep those cultivated?
Yeah, and with seed production, most of our crops are relatively long season. We're not flipping beds and doing a lot of succession plantings of short season crops. And so because of that, and because we are trying to do alternating years of cropping and cover cropping, usually we'll do that. We're trying to make it a habit to do all the path work in the cover cropping year, so basically just like every other year, kind of loosening those up and resetting them so that they don't become problems later on. You can't see it, the hard path and the soft bed, it looks all good, but then you get on the tractor and it's like, it just wants to slide one way or the other. And then you're just like, what's going on? I gotta get this fixed.
Well, actually, that might lead into the next question, because one of the other things I know you told me is that you were having good results using a tine weeder over cover crops. And so you were just talking about how you renovate. It sounds like you do most of the renovation of those pathways maybe in your cover cropping year. So can you tell us a bit about your tine weeder, as far as like how long after seeding the cover crop you go in with a tine weeder? And just if people aren't familiar, the tine weeder looks almost like a comb. It just has static tines, right? And sometimes multiple rows of just fairly fine tines. I mean, you're just almost like raking over the bed, right? So can you just tell us about that? Because we had an article just a couple within the last year or two, it's talking about tine weeders. And so that's something, if people have access, people could go look in the archives and read about tine weeders, but they're a great tool. So yeah, can you just tell us your timing or how you like to use your tine weeder?
I'm still getting used to it. I'm definitely no expert at it, but we've had it a year and a half. And so, so normally we'll use a seed drill to plant our cover crop. And I think we've got a line every 6 inches. And so probably, 3 to 5 days after planting, we'll do our first pass. And so the seed is usually, nothing is up yet, and this works great with cover crop, because usually these are pretty big seeds, vetch, oats, wheat, those sorghum Sudan. And so we can kind of plant them a little on the deeper side too. And so usually, they'll send out the radicle and kind of anchor themselves to the ground, but they haven't sent up a shoot yet. And so that's a nice, easy time to do a pass pre-emergence, and then come up. And how long do we wait before the next pass? Probably a week to 10 days. And then we'll do one more pass over those as is. And then it sort of just depends the species, how well they can handle another pass after that. So yeah, I can't remember how many times we did 3 instead of 2. Most of our times we just did 2 passes. And that felt good enough. It also depends what the weed pressure is, where you're planting, and if you did anything prior to seeding. But yeah, that was always, weed control obviously is important. And we were getting really good at having weed-free crop beds, but I always struggled. We used to just broadcast seed and I didn't have really good tools, so we would broadcast and I always ended up with a certain percentage of weed seed production in my cover crops. Stuff, it wasn't a lot, but it was just enough to feel frustrating. It's like, okay, I'm doing a good job with the crops, but then, because I didn't have any tools to go and weed a broadcasted cover crop. So yeah, it's just so nice to have a clean cover crop and not worry about adding to the weed seed bank at all. Most of the time things will get smothered, and if they produce seed, it's not that much, but it just depends. So, but it's been easy. It's fast. It works great. Takes a little bit of, experimentation and being like, okay, I hope this is not killing everything, and I hope this is going to work, but it's worked out great. So yeah, I'm a convert, definitely.
Oh yeah, it definitely takes a certain amount of trust. I remember the first time I ever used a tine weeder was actually for a guy that we worked for who used horses. So we were going very slow. So it's actually a farm here in Maine that's still around called Horsepower Farm. And so, we were kind of skeptical because it was for a guy we were working for, and we had planted a few 2 or 3 acre field with oats that he wanted to take the oats off. He had this small combine. And so, of course, he wanted them to be not a lot of weed seeds in it. And so I had never used a tine weeder before. And like the best way for me to describe it is just looks like a comb or a rake pretty much, with, you know, a bunch of little fairly fine tines on it that you just drag over the whole crop. And so he was like, go out there with the horses and, you know, take it over the whole crop. And I was like, you sure it's not going to pull out the oats? And sure enough, you know, it was kind of cool because we're, you know, with the horses, we are on the forecart and you're going pretty slow so you can see what's happening. And we had like stop the horses and get off and look. And sure enough, it was taking out almost none of the oats. And it was, I guess there were some broadleaf weeds that were coming up in the oats, and it was getting most of those. So we were like, yeah, proof of concept. But that's interesting to me that you said that you do your first pass before they came up, because, I mean, I guess this is one of those things is like different people just have different weeds, different soils. You know, it's like, one of the things I've mentioned on the pod before is that I feel like so many answers in agriculture are it depends. So it's interesting to me because that's a little what you said about like making the first pass with a tine weeder before anything's come up was interesting, because I thought maybe the crop had to be anchored a little bit more like we did it when the oats were up maybe an inch or less. But you know, you could see the oats, and I think it was pulling out, it was like catching on the broadleaf weeds that were coming up in the oats and pretty much leaving the oats, going past the oats and taking out those broadleaf. But that's interesting to me that you could get a pass even earlier, like you were saying, when you think that the cover crop is germinated but you haven't seen it yet. Because I guess the weeds, I mean, I would think the weeds are also at that kind of like white thread stage, that they're easy to kill. So that's interesting to me that it wasn't pulling out your cover crop, but it was pulling out the weeds. But yeah, man, tine weeders, I feel like are such a great tool. I'm surprised I don't see more people using them, because like, yeah, there's a really simple tool for one thing. You know, there's not shouldn't be super expensive because there's not a ton of like moving parts and things. And then also there's just really fast, you know, you're just running it over the bed. And they make models that can be hand pushed, as well as, you know, bigger tractor models, of course. And so I'm glad you brought up the tine weeder, because I'm a tine weeder fan. And I don't know, I think more people would use them if more people knew about them. I don't know why I don't see more being used, but it's a great tool.
I think they're great. I mean, we've started experimenting with them in our crops too, you know, so we have a handful of crops that we'll go ahead and pass the tine weeder over. And yeah, I mean, as long as it's well enough anchored and, you know, the plant architecture, the way the leaves are, you're not going to rip off too many leaves or anything, then yeah, it's a great just blind tool. I mean, obviously it's one of those tools where it only works on weeds up to a certain size, so you have to do it when they're just coming up for it to be effective. But yeah, you're right. You can just drive pretty quick over them. It's easy. There's no adjustments. Well, I mean, there are adjustments. You can change the angle and pressure of the tine and make it more or less aggressive. But once you set that, then you just go.
Yes, I'm glad you used that word, blind cultivation, right? Because I know that's an important term with that, because, you know, you're not like, unlike some forms of cultivation where you're trying to keep the chisel or the tool like in the row between the crops, you're just like going over the top. And that's one of the reasons you can be so fast, because you're not having to like keep it, you're just going over the top of everything and, you know, relying on the tool to do its job without you having to like finagle anything.
Ours came with a couple bars where you can actually lift up a few of the tines and make kind of an area that's either getting less tined or not tined at all. So, you know, that way we do 2 rows per bed for most things. So if it is a more sensitive plant, you know, we can lift up a few tines and that are, you know, the ones that would be impacting them the most. And that can help as well.
That's cool. I haven't seen that particular feature. Do you remember who makes the one that you have?
It's Einbach.
Einbach, okay.
Yeah, and I don't know what you call the little tool that holds the lifted tines, but yeah, it's really simple. It's just a bar with hooks on it. So easy to use.
All right. Well, yeah, if people are intrigued, I urge them to check out the article by Josh Volk, who's also there in Oregon, within the last couple of years in the magazine talking all about tine weeders. And yeah, he talks about how you can change the angle to be more or less aggressive, like you just said. And, like some of them, I've seen some tine weeders, the tines are more fixed, and some, they kind of like vibrate a little bit, which I think just the action of going through the soil, the vibration may help be a little bit more aggressive. So if people are interested in that, they can check out that article in the Growing for Market archives, so with pictures and everything, because it really, I urge people to check it out. It's a great tool.
It is. My other favorite tool is just the cult crest setup, which is what we use in our crops, where, you've got somebody sitting on a toolbar behind the tractor, steering it independently. And then, you've got a bunch of sweeps and knives and finger weeders, and in whatever configuration you want. It's very adaptable, but, you can do a lot of real precise weeding, and that's been a great tool for us. So
okay, because that's the one where the person on the back of the tractor has like little joysticks kind of, and so they're, am I right, the person on the tractor just worries about staying out of the soft soil, and then the person on the back is steering essentially to make sure you're not hitting the crop. Is that right?
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
You could have one of the newer tractors and belly mount all of those implements. A lot of the full size cult crest tools don't fit like on a G or an old international offset. So right now, it's easier for us to put them on the back and have a separate person steering. But yeah, I'd love one of those new Cultitrax or something where there's enough room there, and then it can all be belly mounted, and then it becomes a one person job. Right. So it's more just about having all your knives and sweeps and fingers on the parallelograms and having that ability to like precisely steer them where you want, or it makes a big difference. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So I hear a lot of seed companies roughly break up their crops into wet seeded and dry seeded crops. Is that a meaningful distinction to you? And if so, can you tell us what the differences are in how you handle wet seeded versus dry seeded crops?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's definitely a good distinction. So dry seeded crops are where the seeds are dry and usually exposed on the plant, or, in some kind of pod. So like lettuce, if you've seen lettuce go to seed, there's the little fluff at the top and the seed is just sitting there in a little cup, or you think about beans and it's dried seed in a pod. As opposed to things like tomatoes, melons, winter squash, peppers, anything where you've got this wet fruit and then the seeds are inside. So I mean, in general, the dry seeded crops, you're going to do some kind of dry threshing process where you're breaking the plants up and trying to extract the seed. So that's, often done with a combine or some kind of similar tool or action. And then with the wet crops, we have a few different tools, but basically you have to macerate the fruit somehow, grind it up. And then you end up with a slurry of fruit and seed. And then usually there's a process where, you'll run it over a screen somehow and remove the big chunks of fruit, and remove some of the finer pulp, and then you end up with something where there's seed and other pulp like it, seed-sized pulp. And then a lot of times we ferment that for a couple days, depending on the species, and then use water to finish cleaning that. And so, usually when you dilute that pulpy, seedy solution, the seeds are usually dense and will sink to the bottom, and the pulp is usually less dense than water and will rise to the top. And so you can either fill up buckets and tip them over and kind of decant them that way, or you can build a sluice and then it becomes sort of like gold panning, right? The seeds are the gold and settling down, and you're trying to wash everything off otherwise. And we'll do both processes depending on the size of the lot. We've got a sluice for big lots, and we'll use a tip with a bucket over for small lots. So, and then with the wet seeds, once you've kind of cleaned it with water as best you can, then you dry the seed. And then once the seed is dry, then you clean it just like you would a dry seed with, screens and winnowing. The advantage of wet seeded crops is that, at maturity, if they get rained on or whatever, the seed is all protected inside the fruit. It doesn't really matter. The challenge with a dry seeded crop is if that seed is mature and ready to harvest and you get a big rain, or wind, it's more susceptible to get damaged that way.
It's a big advantage to having them under those tunnels. You don't have to worry about that so much.
Yep, exactly. Yep. Yeah, that helps. Yeah, I mean, we have it pretty easy here until about mid-September, and then we really got to watch the weather and decide when storms are coming in, are we going to harvest something, or what do we need to protect, or et cetera.
Yeah, it seems like they do a lot of seed production in parts of the world that have dry summers, or at least some dry part of the year, right? I always assume that's one of the reasons that they would do seed production in, say, like an area that's otherwise a desert, or a lot of, I guess not just seeds. I mean, a lot of growing, but maybe especially seeds, happens in irrigated deserts, right? Because there is so much less disease pressure, and I guess there's less jeopardy of your dry seeded crop getting rained on.
Exactly.
If it's dry during the harvest time of the year.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly.
Is there anything about growing seed and running a seed company that would surprise fresh market farmers?
I don't know. I mean, like we were saying earlier, it's pretty similar process up until harvest, and then after that it obviously diverges. Yeah, the rhythm is different, right? So, I mean, when I was a fresh market grower, that rhythm of twice a week having to harvest and then go move your product at some kind of market or do a delivery and do all the wash pack, right? So that's a big change. But yeah, just the things we mentioned, having to rogue plants for off type, and we spend our winter cleaning seed and managing inventory, right? So those are all things I didn't do back then. Yeah, and lots of testing, so we have to test our seeds every year and make sure that they're still meeting standards to be worth selling and planting.
Right, because there's minimum federal standards, right? You can't sell seed below a certain germination percentage, which varies based on crop, or like you have to do an overpack or something like that. Is that about right?
Yeah, so there's a federal register with minimums. It covers most of the main vegetable crops and a lot of the, commodity crops. It doesn't really cover a lot of the more specialty flowers and things. Some states will have their own list that states some minimums for those crops. And I would say the average is like 85 for all your kind of common crops, and then it'll drop to 50 or 60 for maybe, an unusual species or something. But us and like most other seed companies, we're always aiming to be higher than the minimum. So, I mean, you do run into situations where you have a variety or you have an event that, causes it to be lower. And so, yeah, in that situation, then you decide, okay, well, is this seed just destined for the compost pile, or do people, want it enough to overseed and put 2 seeds per cell instead of 1 and then do some thinning? So in those situations, you're supposed to overpack and state that on the packet. We basically overpack everything because even if the germination rate's 92, I want people to have enough seed where, what they bought, they got 100% of what they bought. So, we pack seed with a seed counter that actually does count the seeds. And so if something is a 92% germination, we'll set the counter to put 108 seeds in a packet of 100 seeds or whatever, and go forward that way. So
that's good value right there. So I know you said you were starting to think about what retirement looks like on a small farm, and it's probably smart because it probably takes a while, but I know like so many people, unless their kids definitely want to take the farm over or something, that is a tricky subject for market farmers, because it's not like a job where you just retire and somebody else keeps doing it, So what is your thinking process on that at this point?
Well, it's evolving, but it's definitely an issue, and it's something that I'm looking for a solution towards or for, because I know how quickly time passes, and before I know it, I'm going to want to slow down. And, I mean, the standard farm model where you're a producer and that's kind of it, it's like, well, if you decide you want to stop or slow down, what value does the farm have to continue providing for you? I mean, usually if you sold all the assets of the farm, how far is that going to get you? Probably not very far. I mean, it's one thing if you own the land, but I don't own our farm. We're leasing land. So then it seems like, well, there's two options, right? There's one is creating a business that can function well without you and still provide income for you, right? So you have to hit a scale where you can hire people to run the business, pay them well enough to want to stay long term, and be big enough where you can continue to pay yourself and generate income and live off of that. And or you create a business that's worth selling for enough money that, that would provide for your retirement. So, which, the normal farm is not that kind of business. Farms are so often, especially a small farm, it's about who the farmer is. And if all of a sudden somebody bought that farm, all those relationships with the customers are not just going to automatically move from one to the other. Yeah. So, these are just like the questions and that are running through my mind, and, we'll see what happens with time, but for sure trying to build the business in a way where I can pay people wages that make them say, yeah, I could stay 10, 15, 20 years, that's great. I can raise my family and buy a house and, have a job. And so that's the kind of employer I'd like our business to be, because I feel like you need those kinds of people to have the continuity and the experience to be able to run a business, basically for you and without you later on in the future. And or it becomes successful enough. I mean, that's the nice thing about a seed company is I feel like you can create a business where you can build a reputation and a customer base that, you could hand off to somebody. We could hand off to somebody in 20 years and hopefully be picky about that and ensure that the values and the quality that, we try to instill continue. But yeah, we'll see. I mean, my guess is that more than likely we'll keep the business till we're 90, and have this nice cadre of young people running it for us. Then, we're all in a good place with each other. So, but yeah, I mean, like we were talking about, we're both born in 1977 and time is passing quickly. And
faster all the time.
My retirement account is basically non-existent. So I know I've got 10, 15 years to have something kind of in place for sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
We picked a tough business to build, that kind of security and stability out of. But yeah, I have faith in that, keep just pushing forward and thinking, I think if it's on our minds and we're planning for it and strategizing around it, then, that's our best chance anyways.
Yeah, well, at least it's worth thinking about, because I know some people just think they want to keep going until they die on the tractor or whatever. But then, you may get older and have health problems, or, you may hit 70 and rethink that, when you're 50, like both of us are almost, it's probably a lot better time to start thinking about it than like when your back has already given out. So I appreciate you sharing your thoughts on the subject, because yeah, it's not a straight line for most small farmers of how and when they're going to retire. But I would urge people to think about it before their back gives out.
Yeah, well, and hopefully your back never gives out. But even still, you're still going to want to slow down. You're still going to want to take it a little bit easier and trying to build a system that is going to allow for that somehow, one way or the other.
Yeah, totally.
And still maintain a quality of life. I mean, and I have 3 kids, and hopefully I'll have some grandkids, and you want to be able to spend time and provide and help them when they need it. So yeah, there's a lot of good reasons to think about more than just getting through the next year.
Yeah, it sounds like we're in much the same boat, because when we were younger, we just thought like, well, I don't know, we just are passionate about it and couldn't imagine doing anything else, and just thought, I don't know, thought the farm would be our retirement plan. But now I realize that that's not, just having a farm is not a retirement plan as I get older. So think about it, folks.
Yeah.
Well, Sebastian, that's the questions that I had thought of for you. Is there anything else I should have asked you or that you'd like to say before we let you go?
No, we covered a lot. That was fun. Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously passionate about seed and what we're growing, and then, and just as passionate about systems and trying to build a farm system that, really improves the soil, improves the ecology of the place, and provides for everybody involved a living wage. And it's a it's a tall order for the small farm, and I appreciate all the hard work I see small farmers doing out there, pushing, testing, experimenting, and it's a great movement. And I want to keep seeing it succeed, and I want to succeed in it, and it's fun. It's like the biggest challenge, but it's also like such a creative challenge, right? I mean, that's it excites me and it daunts me all at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, hitting that triple bottom line is hard. I don't know. It's like there's something they say about entrepreneurs, which is like having the ability to see how something can succeed when there's so many ways for it to fail. I think I messed that up, but like you get the general idea. And that's one of the cool things about doing the podcast. I get to talk with people like yourself and so many other farmers who, it's hard. Nobody would tell you the farming is the easiest way to make a living, but it's cool to see everyone's passion and just like the way, everyone makes it work in a little different way. Like we said, it depends, right? Depending on, it's interesting to hear how people make it work depending on their climate, their crops, and all the different variables that go into it, which I think is the value of the podcast, is that we can hear, like there's multiple ways to do a lot of things in agriculture. In fact, I think that's one of the things that keeps it interesting for me, is that just seeing the different ways that people do things. And sometimes I'll think like, oh, you can do it that way, and then you'll meet somebody who's doing it that way and making it work. So cool.
Yeah.
Sebastian, where can people find you online or social media or wherever you want people to look you up?
Well, we've got a website, summertimeseed.com, and so, yeah, we've got obviously all the varieties that we have for sale, and then some information about the farm and a way to contact us. And then we're also on Instagram at Summertime Seed. And yeah, we post pretty regularly, and my wife, Kelly, manages that. So, you can DM with her and get to me also if you want. And yeah, we're excited about being a new option out in the seed world for folks, and especially small farmers. And we're trying to offer larger bulk sizes and then just the small packet. So yeah, I guess I also just wanted to say to your listeners, I would love feedback and comments of like, what are you guys looking for in a seed company? What do you want? What's missing from the world that maybe we can provide. That's what we're trying to figure out and thinking about, what's the need and how can we serve community the best. So I would love to hear that.
Okay, cool. Well, now people know where to get a hold of you. I'm glad you mentioned that at the end about having larger sizes, because yes, I assume that most people in our audience are either farming or want to be. So, there might be some varieties that farmers can do a packet, but it's good to know you have larger sizes. So cool. Well, yeah, your website's beautiful. Lots of nice pictures of the seed productions on the farm. So I urge people to check it out. And Sebastian, I really appreciate you taking the time to tell us about your farm, because I think it's very interesting, and I think people will enjoy hearing about where their seeds come from. So thanks so much for taking the time to tell us about it. And it was fun to meet you, and I think people enjoy it.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks, Andrew. I appreciate the opportunity. That was fun to talk with you.
Yeah, it was fun. Okay, take care, Sebastian. Thanks.
Yep, see ya.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Growing for Market podcast. If you've been enjoying the show, please consider giving us a follow and a rating or a review. It really helps others find the podcast. For more tips and tricks from farmer to farmer, check out our magazine at growingformarket.com. Whether you're a commercial grower or just want to grow like one, subscribe to Growing for Market magazine for the nitty-gritty of growing, marketing, and the business of market farming. We publish 10 issues per year with articles written by experienced farmers on topics ranging from tools and techniques to farm business operations and marketing. If you've been listening to the Growing for Market podcast and haven't yet checked out Growing for Market magazine, we've made a change so you can try the magazine for free. We've added a free month to the beginning of all first-time subscriptions. Try out the digital or paper magazine for a month, and if it's not for you, cancel within 28 days and you'll never even get billed. All subscriptions get you a year of the magazine, plus 150 downloadable back issues from the last 15 years and over 1,700 archived articles. With digital subscriptions starting at just $39 a year, head on over to growingformarket.com and subscribe today to benefit from over 3 decades of writing by farmers, for farmers, in Growing for Market magazine.